You are listening to the Real Men Feel Show with Andy Grant. Real Men Feel encourages men to allow and express all of their emotions. Despite what you may have been taught, all emotions do serve you. Real Men Feel is committed to engaging in discussions that most men aren't having, but you don't need to be a man to join us. The Real Men Feel Show is produced weekly for your growth and enjoyment. Listen to us on podcast platforms including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and many more. You can also watch the show on YouTube by visiting realmenfeel.org/YouTube. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or subscribe on iTunes by visiting realmenfeel.org/iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter at realmenfeelorg and at facebook.com/realmenfeelshow. All links mentioned in each episode are in the show notes found on the blog at realmenfeel.org. Real Men Feel is brought to you by the Good Men Project. Visit goodmenproject.com for more of the conversations no one else is having. Your reviews, comments, feedback, and participation are welcome during the live show and anytime in our Facebook group, on Twitter, or at realmenfeel.org. Now, let's get into this week's show. Hello and welcome to Real Men Feel. This is your host, Andy Grant. And many times through the course of this program, I have shared my experiences with depression and suicide attempts and childhood molestation. And one of the primary motivators of this program is to have men come on and share their own journeys, their growth, their experiences, especially around topics that most men are not talking about. Today is a potent example of that. So before we get going, I do want to give, trigger warning galore. We're going to talk about some dark stuff, some traumatic stuff, but it's to serve everyone's best interest, right? It's taking some of these things out of the darkness, things that are uncomfortable to talk about. Our guest today is willing to talk about them. So that's why we're here. So without further ado, my guest today is author, speaker, and artist who is also a survivor of childhood sex trafficking and loads of physical and emotional abuse. So please welcome Mr. Brian Cardoza.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me, Andy. I'm looking forward to this. I've been looking forward to this since we set it up.
Yeah. So, most people are familiar how I work the show, but a past guest referred me to you. Actually, Henry Johnston said you're a great guy, and we talked for a bit. And yeah, I was like, in 30 seconds, I'm like, oh, yes, he's coming on the show, no doubt. And I don't like to ask a lot of questions once I've made that decision. I like to not know. I like to learn as much as the listeners are here in real time as things happen. But what I do know is that you have quite a rich history of abuse and trauma.
Yeah, I like to call them experiences. You had said earlier that I'm willing to talk about them. The true fact for me, Andy, is that it's not that I'm willing; it's that I have to. It's not a. It's one of the things I always tell people. I don't like being called brave. I really don't. And everybody always fights me on this. But like the reality is that for me, part of my recovery is to take back what happened to me and make it mine and make it my story. And so for me, talking about what happened to me as a child is less bravery because I don't have a choice. If I need to continue to recover, I need to continue to thrive, I need to continue to grow. And in ordinary for me to do that, well then, yeah, I need to talk about it. And I need to be open about it. And I need to realize, just like every other survivor, we should associate no shame with what happened to us. You know what I mean? Like we literally had no part in what happened. It was just what happened to us, not because of us. And it's one of those things where I've often said, and I think I said this to you, and when we talked for that 30 seconds was, I never wanted to become famous or popular because I knew what it was like to have an unwanted dick in my mouth. But the truth of the matter is I do know, and I'm not the only one that does that. And in order for people to heal, they need to know, A, they're not alone, B, that there's a safe space for them to have these conversations, that they're not going to be judged, that they're going to be free of any kind of insular toxicity that's going to come back at them. And all it does is help people when I speak my story. And that's crazy because I kept it hidden for so long and numbed it with the booze and the alcohol and the drugs and, all these things and the sexual deviant behavior, that to now realize that by admitting what happened to me, I'm more free than I was when I thought I was drunk.
Mm. Yeah, that's powerful. And it's one of those times, and I love it because I think this is true more often than people realize it, that kind of being selfish, you taking care of yourself, putting your health, your life first, is actually helping everybody around you that meets you and hears your story.
Yeah, well, it's the proverb: if you can't fill cups with an empty pitcher. And as much as a philosophical and scientist as I am, like I don't believe in a lot of stuff that other people believe in. I hold it at nothing against anybody that does. You know what I mean? Like whatever gets you through, I don't care. I don't care if it's a paperclip. Let's do this. But what's weird is that there are proverbs and there are things that actually come true, and you have to sit there and just be like, okay. And that being, you can't fill cups from an empty pitcher. And so when you have decided that the pitcher can no longer be empty and your story can runneth over, well, then you realize you have plenty. Your pitcher's larger than you thought it was, and you can fill as many cups as you possibly can. But you just still need to take that chance to do some self recovery, to do some work. That's why I paint. That's why, like, I don't know if you guys can see it, but I can just tilt it up a little bit. I don't know. So right there is the first rejection letter for my book. And as crazy as that is, that fills my picture back up, is knowing that I was rejected and I still persevered. And that's the cover of my book. Like I was like, no, screw you. I'm going to do this, and that fills my picture also.
Cool. So you before we get into your experiences, you did mention that, you did have shame. You tried to hide it. You tried to numb yourself out. So what first got you to decide to share what you had gone through?
Well, it's really kind of weird because, like, I like yourself probably as someone who has spoke about what happened to you in your youth. Um, there was always like little tidbits you would tell people, right? And you would just you would it was almost like you were gauging reactions to see how human you could be with them versus how robotic you could be. And that's the best way for me to analyze it, because you would go through and you would just test little like, okay, I told you this, now how did you react? And one day I was in my own home and I was getting my house remodeled, and I had a friend that was a professional interior decorator, and she came over and we started talking, and she was one of those really introspective ones. It was just like, I need to know everything about you before I decide the color of that wall. And so as insane as I thought that was, I was like, well, this is the first time someone is really asking me about me. So I'll test him. So I told her some of the, like, I always hinted at the sexual abuse. I didn't, but I always told her about the more masculine, like, oh no, I was beaten with coat hangers and broomsticks, and you know what I mean? And I like all this, but I always kind of hinted at what happened sexually to me. And so one day she brings me the book, A Child Called It. And I don't know if have you read this book?
I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
It's a brutally hard read to go through, not because it's poorly written, but because of the stuff that Andy went through. And she brought me the book, and I read the book, and then she was just like, look, if he can do it, so can you. You need to write your book. You need to tell people what happened to you. And when I read The Child Called It, I had this realization, was that there was a part of me that I don't want to say healed, but definitely had like a salve put over the top of it, because now I knew that I'm not the only one that had this mother who was a facade in one area and then a brutal terrorist at home. You know what I mean? Like, and I was just like, oh my God, like I'm not alone. Like even on this part, I recognize that we had joint behaviors, and I feel better And so that was the realization, was that I really had to start talking more about what happened to me. And so I started doing some keynote speeches and talking at crisis centers. And that became the antithesis of my lifelong dream, is to make enough money with the book to where I can go to rape crisis centers across the nation and speak to just survivors. I mean, like, not sell convention halls. I'm not greedy. I don't want a Maserati or a Tesla. But I do want to help other survivors, and so that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, was hoping that I would sell enough books to where it would happen.
Cool. Cool. And a Tesla would help you travel the nation much easier and cheaper than any other means, by the way. But
If I only knew somebody who had one.
I will be glad to. It's one of the things that back when I started writing books and speaking, it was a nationwide tour was my dream too. So maybe by speaking our dreams, something shall happen here. Who knows?
One can hope. Yeah.
Cool. So how old were you when the abuse started? Because now it sounds like it was your home. It wasn't what you left the house. It was where you were growing up. It began.
Yeah. So I'll never. It was the day my father left my mom was the day the abuse really started. Like in most 1980s families, there was always that trial separation. Where like the mother would stay in one room, father would stay in the other. And I'll never forget it, because I got home from preschool. I ran into my dad's room because it was snowing. I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, and I was gonna, like, my dad was always very negligent on me. He really didn't. I don't want to say he hated me. I don't want to say, because that would have been an emotion, and he just never showed me any of that. So I just don't think that. I think he viewed me as one of those people that kept him tied to a woman that he didn't want to be with anymore. And so we were never close, but I was always that innocent, naive 6-year-old, like, dad. And so I went inside to grab him because it was snowing, and we were like, oh, we're going to shovel the driveway and have a snowball fight. And I wrote this in my book, and I opened the door to his room, and it was clean. And it was so clean that there wasn't even the memory of a cigarette, if that makes any sense. Like, it was just spotless. And I hit the floor crying because I knew what it meant. And my mom was right behind me, and she said to me these words: he left because you couldn't make him love this family. And that's when the mental abuse started, and that's when the physical abuse started. Well, I have an older brother who's 4 years older than me, and my mother, by her actions and deeds, convinced my brother that I was the reason his father left, that I was the failure of the family, and it was my fault for any of the ills that happened. And later on that year in the summer, my brother sold me to his best friend for revenge. And his best friend, who was 5 years older than me, um, as the way he put it, taught me what sex was, face down on a red beanbag on a balcony floor of a second floor in a house. And that's when the molestation started until I was 9. And and the physical and mental abuse continued till I was 12. The mental abuse really got ramped up after I was 12, because between 11 and 12, Devin, I grew 1 foot, like, and I'll never forget, because my mom hit me with a broomstick and it broke, and I just was like, what? And she, like, she had that look of like, oh, this isn't working anymore, and so that's when the mental abuse got ramped up to the constant threatening of being homeless. Like, she threw me out when I was 12 for 2 weeks. She threw me out when I was 13 for 3 weeks, and then at 15, She threw me out permanently on December 14th, 1989. And I slept in an abandoned car in Anchorage, Alaska, and learned a very valuable and important lesson that night. But when I almost, like, not figuratively, but literally almost froze to death. Mm. So that's it in a nutshell.
and so since it was beginning with your family, was there anyone you could dare share this with? Did you dare mention it to anyone, ask for help, anything like that?
No. My family, when my father left, and he left the state by the time I was 11 and moved cross country, he had pretty much made it clear that I wasn't his son. My brother was his son. The other family members, I was so isolated. I didn't even really have friends. Like, I had 2 friends from the time I was 12 to the time I was 15. And as weird as this is going to sound, Andy, because of those people, that's how I found out I was being abused. I say it often, like, my abuse started so early that when people are like, "Oh, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you survived that." Well, the reality for me, it was just Tuesday. It was what I did, every Wednesday and Thursday. It was get home, clean, get everybody up for work, get everybody out for school. If I have time, I get to eat. If I have time, I get to shower. Then I have to go to school. Then get home, have to make sure everybody's got their stuff done. Then clean the house. Then cook dinner. And this was literally from the time I was 7. And if I didn't get everything exactly correct, I was beaten. And if I didn't get everything exactly the way I was supposed to, I was beaten. I'll never. One of the worst beatings I ever got, Andy, was from my mom, because she had hinted that she'd wanted fried chicken this week, and I never picked up on the hint, and I made spaghetti and got beaten, like, ruthlessly, because it wasn't fried chicken. And so that was my life until I was 15. But at 12, when I started making friends and hanging out with friends and seeing their interaction with their parents around dinner tables, and that, I was like, something's not right. Like, why, how come, they get to go do that when I'm told to be in my room? You know what I mean? Like, what's the difference? And that's when I started to realize that the best thing for me would be to either freeze to death in that car, go back and beg to be let back in, or just keep fighting. And that was a choice that a 15-year-old shouldn't have to make, but
it's where you were. Yeah, that's horrible that your life is so distorted, but it's all you knew. So you thought, oh, this is everybody family. This is a normal, happy family in America, that what I could deal with.
Yeah. I mean, there was no way of me knowing that other 10-year-olds weren't being subjugated to this themselves. You know what I mean? I was so isolated. But lo and behold, lo and behold, I have far more brothers and sisters than I realized. But lo and behold, that wasn't the norm. And that's kind of the sad part, is that I have so many brothers and sisters of abuse that have gone through similar stories, that haven't been able to speak out about it. And that's why I do what I do, so that they know that they're not alone.
Did you ever heal the relationship with your brother, with your father, with your mother?
No. As my therapist once said to me, Andy, this was my first therapist in Boston, I credit a lot of my healing to. He looked at me and goes, "You know what you do with cancer sometimes, Brian?" And I was just like, "What's that?" And he goes, "Yeah, cut it out." And I was just like, "Oh, well, I get the analogy." like, I may have been hit in the head a lot, but not that many times, And so it was the understanding that in order for me to thrive and grow and recover, I needed to get rid of those toxic people out of my life, even if they were family. And the minute I decided to do that is when my recovery really started to take off. Now, granted, I still suffer from the same thing most people do. I want to be part of a family. I desperately would love to have the appreciation and affirmation from my mom and my brother, but at the end of the day, if it was causing more tumors, then why do you want it?
Right. Right. From my perspective, you've experienced and learned that it's more important your affirmation of yourself than whatever they have to say.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, I go to bed with myself. At the end of the day, well, and my dog Calypso, but not in that.
And I'm sure he loves you.
Yeah, yeah. And so at the end of the day, that's what really, really matters. And at the end of the day, it doesn't happen on a regular, but every once in a while I get like a private message from somebody, and they're like, "I bought your book, thank you," and I'll be in tears, and like I had one guy in Canada who bought my book, sent me a message, and he was just like, "Because of your book, I'm writing mine." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's awesome. Send me a copy. I'll buy it when it's out." And the very first copy he got, he kept one for himself. And then the second copy was signed and delivered to me the like a week after he got it. He was just like, "This is because of you." And I was just like, "All right, well, I can die now. I'm good." You know what I mean? And that's the reason to do this. That's the reason to be out here, is to just let people they're not alone, and let them know that it doesn't always, the light at the end of the tunnel doesn't always have to be a train. It really could be the end of the tunnel.
Right. Cool. So you're 15, you're on your own, you're in Anchorage, Alaska. How do you survive?
Well, luckily I was a big child. I found a slumlord that would rent me an apartment under the assumption that I was 18 because I was already large. Then I made the mistake about a year after I got my first place. I let my brother move in. Actually, I don't know if I ever let him or he just moved in. You know, I didn't at that point in time. I was still so steeped in the abuse and the obligatory accusant to what they needed, that when he was just like, "I'm moving in," I was like, "All right," And so, like 3 months later, um, crazy enough, 3 months later, I was in a, like, you know what a strip mall is, that, like, this long confines, and we got the fifth apartment, and there was a sixth apartment, all in this long tunnel, this long building, and the apartment next to us caught fire, and they had all this stuff happened. Well, the landlord repaired it, so my brother and I, we move into the next one because it's nicer and it's bigger, you know what I mean? And like 2 months later, my brother throws me out of my own apartment, and I'm homeless and I'm living on the streets, and I had to live on the streets for a while. And there'd be families that would take me in, you know what I mean? Like, I'd stay there for a couple of weeks and then get back out on the road, and sleeping in cold spots and just trying to find places to crash for the night was a daily challenge. Um, but in my head, I never wanted to give up, and so by the time I was 18, borderline 19, I realized that if I want something different, I have to do something different. If that makes any sense.
Mm.
And so I joined Job Corps. I was like, at least while I'm in Job Corps, I know I have 3 square meals a day. I have a roof over my head, and I'll learn something. And that decision was the last time I was homeless. And not to mention, I mean, there have been times when it was kind of iffy, you know what I mean? But that was definitely the last time I was homeless.
So we talked about you being hesitant. Like, why do you think men are so unwilling to talk about these sort of experiences happening to them? And is it just people, or is it different for men and women?
I thought about this question. Not that you would, okay, just let everybody know this is like a magic trick. I had no idea these were going to come before. like Andy and I never met and discussed this. But no, I thought about this question because from your interviews prior, I kind of figured that these were some of the questions you were going to ask. I think the reason why is because in male man-to-man talk on a regular basis, Andy, if somebody brings up the concept of rape to a man being raped in a casual speaking conversation, what do you think somebody in the group is going to say? They're going to say, "Oh, I would kill a guy. There's no way he'd have to kill me." You know what I mean? Like those are the conversations. Because we have this like there's just no way. I'm so much more of a man. And when you hear those things as a survivor, you start ticking off the people that you can open up to, and you start ticking off the people like, well, nope, you know what I mean? Yeah, I know who you're going to blame for this. Nope, you know what I mean? And so it gets to the point to where you don't disclose because you're afraid you're going to be viewed as not man enough. And the other thing I found for me personally, and I think the not man enough thing encompasses a lot of people, but what was my main driving factor was I over-masculated. So when I was in my early 20s to mid 30s, if my friends drank 12 beers, I had 20. If my friends, smoked 2 joints, I had an eighth. If my friends had a one night stand in the month, I tried to have 3. You know what I mean? Like I tried to be so much more masculine and so much more man than they, that it ended up becoming the trap because I was trying to prove my masculinity and trying to cover up what happened to me as a child. So much so that even to admit that I was raped and molested would have been so contrary to that persona that I was going to turn everything that I was then into the lie. And that's the hard part, is that because so many men over emasculate when these things happen, that you realize to open up and say that this happened to you would mean that everything that you have been doing is the lie. You know what I mean? And who likes to admit when they're lying? Who likes to admit when they're wrong? You know what I mean? Like, so I think that's part of the problem, because we grow up in a society that says real men are Conan the Barbarian and John Wayne, and they don't have emotions, they don't have feelings, and they don't have insecurities. They're just men, and if they feel insecure, they watch hockey. You know what I mean? And that is the most asinine thing in the world. I tell people all the time, like, I am stupid strong. I mean, I am 44. I still bench 605. You know what I mean? Like, I've had 5 knee surgeries, and just today I did a set of 30 for on legs for 400 plus pounds. You know what I mean? I am stupid strong, and never in my entire life has my strength ever been tested more than when my therapist looked at me and said, "What did he do to you?" And the show of vulnerability, the show of being willing to heal from that, was more strength than I ever realized I had, and I think we need to reframe what man cards are, and we need to reframe what masculinity is, and we need to rethink what image are we portraying to people around us. And until we have those conversations in these places like we're having right now between you and I, Andy, more men are not going to come forward. And until we do, then they will, because then they'll realize this is a safe spot. This is a place you can open up and be vulnerable with.
Yeah, and that beautifully said. And that's exactly why this is called Real Men Feel. I was like, what if there was a time and a place where your manliness wasn't judged just by how much do you bench? It was like, how much can you feel? How much how many emotions have you felt today?
And in the entire mental health thing, like I'm diagnosed PTSD, social anxiety, borderline agoraphobia, body dysmorphic disorder. And I, you know, I am not my diagnosis. I just live with them. I am also not the face of rape. I've just been raped, and I know what it's like, and I know that pain. And I wish more men would open up about it, because if they opened up about it, the reality is we would have more centers. We would have more trauma informed brick and mortar places for men to go to discuss these things. Because, you know, um, Andy, in your vast knowledge, would you ever open up a restaurant that served lentils and bark?
No.
Nobody's asking for it, right? And that's the reason why there aren't centers for men, because no, men aren't asking for it. I'm not going to waste resources to open a restaurant that serves lentils and bark because nobody's asking for it. Now, if all of a sudden, 32 million people are like, I like lentils and bark, I'm opening up a chain of lentils and bark restaurants. And we as men need to be brave enough to have these conversations, and realize that real bravery is in these conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. So I don't even know if you can answer this or contemplate this, but I want to ask it anyway. Is it more the experiences, what happened to you, that challenged your sense of being a man and your masculinity? Or was it what other men mirrored back to you as what being a man meant?
I think it's both. I really do. I think I've said this in other interviews, that I think the reason why I have such a different opinion of what masculinity is because growing up in the 80s, sex abuse didn't happen to men. That was a woman's thing. That happened to women. You know what I mean? And if it did happen to you, excuse the language, but I'm just being period correct. If it did happen to you, you were a fag. You know what I mean? Like you just weren't man enough. And when you go through life thinking that you have suffered something that only women do, you start to become a little bit sensitive to those issues, and you start to look at yourself and just be like, okay, what else has gone on? And when you start to look at life through an outside perspective, that's like the one good thing about abuse for me, was I was able to disassociate from the pain and just keep moving. And so when I get into periods where I'm in deep pain mentally or emotionally, I can disassociate and then look at this from an outside perspective and be like, okay, so what triggered you? Okay, so this is what happened. And I think those things really helped me change and reframe my mind on masculinity. And then also be in that time frame when I was the guy that was drinking 20 beers, and how many friends I had because I was that guy. You know what I mean? Like, I was the guy that if you made fun of my buddy, they would just be like, hey, Brian. I'd be like, what? You know what I mean? Like, and that's a projection of what they thought masculinity was also. They thought I was that. You know what I mean? I was the man. And inside, I was dying, and inside I was slowly committing suicide, one bottle and one joint and one cigarette at a time.
Is stigma more than embarrassment? Like what is stigma?
To me, stigma is one of those things where it's an exterior labeling from somebody else, and it's a fear of an exterior labeling. It's like, to me, when those people, I really, and I hope you understand where this is coming from. I can't stand it when people are like, I don't give a crap what other people think about me. Yes, you do. Don't, you really do. Stop joking, stop kidding yourself. Realize that there's an importance in it, and that you can then look at yourself and be like, well, okay, you know what, I do care. And I do care that people look at me as a survivor, and I do care that they look at me as a person that they can come to and they can speak to. I do care about that. Now, at what level do I give them in my own head on how much I care is my own position, but I still have to acknowledge I do care. And when a stigma is labeled, it's because they don't want to admit that they care, and they don't want to admit that this has happened, and that they feel bad that you have labeled them as something. Um, it's much easier just to be like, oh, that's what why do you think that? Okay. What behavior can I do to correct so that you don't think that? If it's a negative stigma, you know what I mean? Um, but I think people's fears of stigma comes from the fact that real men don't care. Well, yes, they do.
When it's bizarre how many flashbacks I'm having during this conversation and stuff. Like, wow, a couple times I've felt like, wow, I'm on the verge of tears right now, and things I hadn't thought of in a long freaking time. So I'm going to talk about it.
Yeah.
So my molestation happened when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and part of my experience was a neighbor had me do things with his young daughters. And even then at age 6, there was I had heard enough from society, movies, whatever, to know like, oh, this is cool. This is supposed to be what I'm after. So it was really freaking bizarre to label that, or even as I discovered it, unpacked it years later, good, bad, no, that like, and again, the hype, I'm like, oh, good for you. Or if a female rapes a young boy, oh, good for that kid, lucky kid, good for him, and all that kind of crap.
Got lucky. Yeah.
So was that part of your experience, kind of both coming, both ways, coming from both sexes, and some things, oh, that should, lucky you, Brian? Was that ever something that was said to you?
No.
Okay.
And I think it's because mine was a same-sex rape. So, growing up in the 80s, like it was a toxic time. Growing up in the 80s, I was told emphatically, like, this is the reason why I'm um, single and never been married and never had children. And now to find out later in years of advocacy how wrong the stereotype was. It's if there's anything that beats me up mentally anymore, it's this. And it's the fact that growing up in the 80s as a male sex abuse survivor, I was told about the vampire myth. Are you familiar with the vampire myth?
No.
So the vampire myth is that once you were bitten, you are a biter. And that meant that because I was abused and molested, that I was going to be an abuser and a molester. And I was so determined to never have that happen. I removed myself from society in a way where I didn't allow relationships to happen. Like the minute a girl would get close, I'd be like, I'm crazy, right? See you later. You know what I mean? And like, so I ran like hell from those times, because men were so unheard of that I was a rarity. I was an oddity. And then, we fast forward to later on, and I get a lot of people being like, "You're brave," but at the same time, from women's groups, like on the Me Too movement, myself and a bunch of guys got lit up. I mean, just completely lit up by women just being like, "How dare you try to steal our movement?" I've heard comments, well, men do all the raping, so, like I've heard, this was from somebody in the industry, and I call it an industry because really, I feel like it is. We were discussing sex trafficking, and we were talking about the adult industry, and they were, the entire conversation was a really good conversation. They kept talking about, little Joni who had left Kansas and wanted to become a star and went to California and got sold into sex trafficking, and now she does porn and all this kind of stuff, right? And I was the only male advocate in the room, and I was just like, well, what about little Johnny that left Kansas and had the same dream and got wrapped up into gay porn too? And the person that said this, Andy, worked at a crisis center, still works at a crisis center, looked me dead in the face, and she was just like, yeah, but the men enjoy it. And that's there is such pushback for being a male survivor, that it's really hard. I just recently on I want to say the 2nd of October, I was at a group for a Stand Up Speak Out, Monica Day in Raleigh. Beautiful, beautiful organization, incredible woman. Well, let me rephrase that: incredible freaking human being. You know what I mean? And she had me come out because we were talking one day, and she had this realization was that men, we go through the exact same things women do. We go through the same trauma. We go through the same bartering system. We have the same insecurities after a molestation or a rape. And so she invited me out to her women's group where they had a conference, and I was one of two males in the conference that were actually parts of the conference. And it was crazy because we're on this panel and we're all survivors, myself and another male survivor, James Bright. And we're getting asked these questions, and the rest of the panel are all women. And I'll answer a question, and every girl in the entire panel is just like, all agreeing, all the heads are shaking, like, yep, me too, me too. And so it was the realization for her, and a realization I've had for years, that men should not be outside of the healing spectrum. Men should not be removed from the recovery system for men or for women, because the more they realize that we are truly allies, the more comfortable they will become, thusly going back into society after therapy and all these kinds of things, because they will realize that that there are male allies, that we're not all just rapists,
Yeah, it's unfortunate that people, but again, it's freaking trauma. It messes you up. So even as you think you're healing and trying to heal, you can still have very distorted views, and it's easier to blame everybody than just, especially if it's someone close to you, if it was someone you trusted, to blame the individual. It's easier to say they're all bad, no matter what.
I've had people come to me and after they've heard my story and just be like, "Oh, you must hate gay people," and I was just like, I'm too lazy to have that much energy to hate a whole group of people because of what one person did. You know what I mean? Like you put me in the room with my rapist, it's going to be a different conversation. But because because he had a proclivity to be with other men, doesn't go on to other people that have that same proclivity.
Right, right. I mean? It wasn't that aspect of him was not the root of your problems.
I don't like him.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? And and so it's a lot of toxicity on both sides. I've never heard, I have heard some affirmations more recently, but you would be amazed at the amount of pushback a male survivor gets. And especially in a genre where you would think like, no, solidarity is where we need to be, you know? But it just is, it's yeah, you know what I mean? Like, but it's still happening.
So I hadn't heard the vampire myth by that name, but I certainly grew up with an expected, and that was a conscious fear I had, that, oh, now I'm going to be a rapist. Now I'm a molester because that's how this works. And because I was 20 years old and in a mental hospital after another suicide attempt. And I was in like a class setting and they were talking about sexual abuse. And I just started having flashbacks, just having pictures and who it was and when it was, and my age, and the image I kept, oh God, freaking me out.
Yeah.
The image I kept having was knowing, yep, I know your line. I can't even say it.
Yeah. Just breathe, my friend. Just breathe. Yeah. It's all right, man. This is the space to have those.
Yeah, no, I did not expect this, but I'm glad it's happening. But just show that this is not some show for entertainment. This is the shit.
Entertaining.
But so I had that realization and started, but I didn't believe it, because at the same time, when was this? This is late 80s, early 90s, and it was big on TV of false memories, and you can't trust the kids. They're remembering things and all that shit. So I'm like, did this happen or not? And so I'm tormenting myself with, I'm horrible. No, I'm a victim. I'm a mess. No, I'm making it up. I still don't know what's wrong with me. All these things happening at the same time. But yeah, I've never had kids, and I decided I wouldn't have kids from a younger age, but now this really enforced it. And it made me even doubt because kids always liked me. Kids like gravitate to me. You know, dogs and puppies and children always seem to know who the good people are.
Yep, yep, yep.
And it made me like doubt that and fear that and not trust myself and all that kind of just on top of the sexual abuse and trauma. There's this whole trauma from discovery and what people talk about it. And again, survivors not sticking together, or, you know, people attacking victims and challenging memories. And, you know, no one, like I said, you don't want to be famous for this kind of shit. You don't grow up and go, oh, here's my plan.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like at no point in time when I was 6 years old, being forced to do things I never thought I would do, was I like, oh, this is going to work out in my 40s. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Little different trade school.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, it's, but you know, there's some weird things about being an abuse survivor. Is that you're a survivor? You know what I mean? And there are things that have happened in my life where I'm like, well, if this hadn't happened, would I have responded in this situation? You know, and for instance, like I'm just gonna sound like the guy that's like the hits keep coming, you know. So on October 15th in 2017, I was at the local community college trying to sign up for classes to become an art therapist, and I'm in there, and I'm just like the typical old guy trying to set up an email, like, yeah. I'm like, oh, I type this way, you know what I mean? And this lady comes running in, and she's just like, gunmen on campus. And so nobody responds. So I'm just like, oh, well, this must be just a drill, you know? And then she comes back around, and it's a singular entrance office, concrete with 26 windows. Like this is where the abuse came in, because I was hyper vigilant and I was hyper aware of what was going on. I knew where my exits were. I knew what kind of a room I was in. So I knew the diagram, everything just instantly in my head. And she comes running back around the partitions for the offices. And it's just like, no, this is not a drill. There is a gunman on campus. So everybody starts to freak out. And I know it's because of my abuse, I was able to disassociate and develop a plan. And it was just like, okay, all right, you guys have an office, your lunchroom. Everybody get in the lunchroom. I took the couches that were in there for the lounge for people to wait, and I shoved them up against the door. I'm like, if this guy's coming in, he's going to have to fight for it. You know what I mean? So I shoved the couches up the door. I make sure that I'm the last person in the room. And there are 14 people in the room. Seven of them are, in their 60s to maybe 70s. One lady looks like she has either propecia or cancer because she's got a wig on. There's a couple adolescent teens, 18 to 21. There's two other guys in the room, and then there's me. And I realize I'm the biggest guy in the room. I realize that if a shooter comes in this room, that I'm the most viable for defending these people. So I automatically take the door. And when I take the door, I realize that if I'm in the middle of the door and if he shoots to clear the door, then I'm going to be shot and fall backwards vertically. So the best thing for me to do is to sit down by the doorknob to where if he shoots into the room, I can either open the door, grab the gun, take him out, or if he shoots me, I fall horizontally and I become a 400-pound door wedge and nobody else is going to die. And in my head the entire time, I'm thinking to myself, see, Mom, I have worth. See, Mom, I am not worthless. Even in my death, I'm going to save these people. And if it hadn't been for what I had gone through, I can't say I would have reacted that way. You know what I mean? Like, I do know I can say that I reacted that way and I had gone through all that stuff. But I do think that the stuff I had suffered had made me take to the realization that if I die, I die, but I'm not dying worthlessly. I'm not dying and leaving these people to stay in this room. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to go out with a bang, and I don't think, that people that haven't gone through what I've gone through would have reacted the same way.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask, like, how did you avoid just being wallowing in victimhood for the rest of your life? But it sounds like, recognizing your resilience and that you really were a survivor, right? Not just fall into that
Well,
trap.
well, let's not be, I'm not going to kid anybody. I'm not going to say I haven't spent my fair time in the wallowing pool of misery. You know what I mean? Like there have been some times where I was just like, oh, I'm in the deep end. You know what I mean? Um, and then there are times when I'm just like, my toes aren't even wet. But the reality is that it's just Tuesday, and every day I get up is an opportunity. Um, you know, right now I live jokingly, but honestly, it was just like, I live my life art commission to art commission. Um, and yes, I want the book to sell, and yes, I would love more speaking engagements, and yes, I would like to be able to one day open up a men's rape crisis center. Those just aren't in the books right now. You know what I mean? And so every day I get up and I try to sell more books. Every day I get up, I try to sell more paintings. Every day I get up, I go to the gym, um, and I try to get stronger. And I see my therapist once a month, and I do these so I can make sure that not so that I'm viable, but so that the message is. Um, I realize that if I look like Antonio Banderas in the 90s, I'd probably get further, but um, that's just not in my cards. I look like a painting brush hanging upside down and an eraser. You know what I mean? So it's just the way it is.
And so art is definitely serving you now. Had you always been artistic and expressive, or is this something you discovered as part of healing?
Well, when the one thing I'll heap upon my mother was that she was an astounding artist. She was one of those people that you hand her a picture and she'd paint a copy of it, and you'd be hard pressed to figure out which one was the picture. You know what I mean? You'd be like, no, that one's smaller, so that's the picture. And I remember growing up that I would start to draw because I felt like that was a way to ingratiate myself. And little did I know that it was just going to cause far more pain, because it was always like, because I would draw demons as a kid, and she would just be like, "Why do you always draw demons?" And I was just like, and I always came up with this like really crafty excuse, like, like, well, because who knows what a demon looks like, you know what I mean? And she was, and it wasn't, I didn't want to tell her, it's because that's all I see, you know what I mean? Like, and so for a few years as a kid, I was artistic, and I would play around with stuff. But then after I got thrown out, I really stopped. And in '97, I was facing 18 years jail time for the driver of a car having 4 ounces of crystal meth and a loaded 357 on them. And I got out. I spent a bunch of time in solitary confinement, and that was a pivotal moment in my life. I say there are three things in my life that have changed me for the better, and that was almost freezing to death, jail, and therapy. And I spent 7 days in solitary confinement, had a lot of time to think, and I got out of solitary. I took a Greyhound bus from Spokane, Washington, to Newport, Rhode Island. Um, Found my dad, and little did I know my brother was actually living with my dad. And started to have conversations that I needed to have. And lo and behold, one day I was working a job at security, and I just picked up a pencil and some paper, and I just started drawing again. And I found a soothing effect on that, and it just landslided to the point now where I sell my stuff internationally. I've sold stuff to New Zealand. I've designed book covers for other survivors, and it's art has been a great thing for me. But at the same time, it has been completely 100% a communicative desire to try to heal others through art and to help them create their art so that they can heal.
Mm. So it may be an easier path to not forcing lentils and bark on people is opening up men's artists centers as opposed to
Well,
counseling
yeah.
centers or something.
Well, that's one of the things I do with Survivor Nights, my traveling art show. Is we have a traveling art show where I tell people, I don't care what you survived. I just care that you survived. And so it's, I have cancer survivors and domestic violence survivors and heart attack survivors and all these different survivors. They that express their healing through art. And we do traveling. We do art shows all across the nation. Well, we're trying to get them all across the nation. Right now, currently, our largest one is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. Why can't I speak? I don't smell toast, so I'm not having a stroke. But it's beautiful because Michael Broussard, one of my favorite people, he's the host of the show in Philly, and we do it at the University of Pennsylvania, the rotunda there. And I don't know if you remember this, Andy, but for us, it's amazing because we're both male survivors, and that's the home of Jerry Sandusky. So we do this show where it's a lot of spoken word because that's what Michael's really good at. And we have art and everything like that, but it's 4 hours of us just putting our middle fingers up to Jerry Sandusky and just being like, oh no, we're taking this back. This is weed. This is, men can come back here too. You know what I mean? Cool. And that's what we do with the art show is we give men an anonymity because we don't put it up like, here's our cancer survivors, here's our sex abuse. We put up the art, and it allows them to communicate it in an anonymous way. And then they get to see the reaction of other survivors and other people. And then they it's a beautiful moment, Andy. It's why, if you ever get to Philly during one of these shows, you bring Kleenex because you'll be sitting there and you'll just watch somebody and you see somebody just completely envelop themselves in this painting because they're just like, that's me. You know what I mean? And when people start to feel those affirmations that they weren't alone, they just start to open up, and it becomes like a hug fest and like this entire like, oh my God, I thought I was alone, and you just painted exactly what it feels like. So I'm not. You know what I mean? And it's an amazing experience.
So what's the best way for people to learn about this? Well, how can they find out where the next show is or when?
On Facebook, I have a page called Survivor Nights. It's KNIGHT, like Knights of Old. And we post up all of our updates and our events coming up on that page. We haven't had an event in a little while. It's a hard event for hosts because it's nothing for the parameter of the show, which is a 4-hour show. Nothing is for sale. Now, if you sell a piece when you're walking up to the door, I don't care. If you sell a piece at 4:01, I don't care. But during the show, it's not for sale. And that's because we're there to communicate awareness. We're not there to raise funds. We're not there to, try to make money. We're just there to just raise the awareness in a free atmosphere. And so the buildings that host us, they have to be able to be free because we can't afford to pay you. And they have to have volunteers. And the show is so successful. This is the funniest thing. I know we got to wrap it up because of time. This is the funniest thing. We did our show last March in Philadelphia. It was our second show. The show is so successful, Andy, that as we're tearing everything down and putting everything in cars and getting everything transported, the head person for the rotunda walks up to Michael Broussard, who is the host for the show there, and looks at her, and she looks at him and goes, okay, so we already have you scheduled for next March. You just tell us when you want to do it and we're in. If that doesn't tell you the success, that people are like, no, a year out, this is your spot. Yeah. If that doesn't tell you the success, then I don't know what else to tell you. You know what I mean? Like so.
Cool. Well, let's help fulfill some of your other dreams and talk about things you can sell and you do sell. Tell me about the book.
The book is called The Unexpected Victim. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It comes in ebook and paperback. To find out more about me, you can go on briancardoza.com. A lot of my art's there, or Survivor Nights. I post a lot of my art on Survivor Nights. I always try to make sure that there's new stuff going up so we don't lose traction on it. And then also, I always say it jokingly, but I'm serious. If you just Google my name and then put Survivor, I have like 7 pages, which honestly, Andy, if you'd asked me in my 20s, I thought that would have been a criminal record. But it's not, and you can even find me on Plenty of Fish, Brian Cardoza. So I don't play around.
Cool. Well, I really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing your heart so openly and widely. I do everything I can to help fuel your dreams and getting more things traveling, getting more men talking.
Yeah,
that's what it's about.
The same to you. And let this be said. And I try to say this to everybody, but more importantly, the people that know what the monsters look like. Andy, thank you. Your bravery you exhibit every time you turn on the mic and give somebody a voice is astounding. And don't let anybody ever tell you different. The fact that you're sitting here willing to face possible triggers from a guy who looks twice your size but roughly the same, fashion sense, tells you how brave you are. And there's no way to thank you enough for being able to do that. So thank you for giving us the opportunity. And I think that my quote from my art shows, my community art shows, is communities make survivors. Stronger survivors make stronger communities. And that's what you're helping us do. So thank you.
Cool. And my reply wants to be, it's my pleasure, but it isn't always my pleasure. So I've got to find some other way to respond.
Yeah. Sometimes it sucks.
Yeah. Glad to know you, but sometimes it feels really shitty to know you.
Exactly. Yep.
Cool. So again, thank you, Brian. Thank you for everyone for listening. Do check out Brian's work, his book, his artwork. Give this show a like, a comment, some feedback. Share it with someone that you think needs to be hearing this message and know that they aren't alone in whatever they're facing, whatever they're surviving. We would appreciate it, and I know they would appreciate it as well. So until next time, look for us on realmenfeel.org for more conversations people aren't having. The Good Men Project. Check out Brian. We'll give links to all the Facebook pages and websites that he's got going on, and maybe we'll grab some artwork and edit it into this video too. If you're watching on YouTube, if I've left this edited in, then I've added some artwork into it. So I hope you enjoyed what you saw. So again, thanks Brian. Thanks everyone else, and as always, be good to yourself.
Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to Real Men Feel. Reach out to us at realmenfeel@gmail.com. Learn more about Andy Grant at theandygrant.com. Until next time, visit realmenfeel.org or the Real Men Feel Facebook group and share what you thought of this episode. Please give this podcast a review on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you are discovering Real Men Feel. Visit goodmenproject.com for more of the conversations no one else is having.